What you watch depends on what kind of mood you're in. Sometimes you're craving comedies like Friends or South Park, and sometimes you're more into dramas like HBO's Succession and House of the Dragon. There's also cooking shows like Chopped and Beat Bobby Flay, and even movies like The Lord of the Rings and Shazam! Fury of the Gods. Well, Max is the streaming destination that has the best of entertainment for whatever mood you're in anytime. And plans start at as little as $9.99 a month. Max, the one to watch. Subscription required. Visit max.com.
Imagine you're looking at a balancing scale with everything you do for other people on one side and everything you do for yourself on the other side. If it isn't balanced, maybe it's time to spend a little more time on you. And therapy is a great place to start. BetterHelp connects you with a licensed therapist online who can help you find that balance and stick to it. Visit BetterHelp.com/positive to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/positive.
Jacob Albrocht, Tommy Castor. This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, everybody, welcome back in Sports Daily here on KFH. It's Albrocht, it's Castor, it's a Tuesday. The Nuggets are NBA champions. Fred VanVleet's a free agent. We've been talking a lot of hoops in the first hour. We'll shift to a little baseball here to start the second hour. But first, we want to tell you about Free Music Friday from 8 to 10 o'clock at the Andover Central Park at the Capitol Federal Amphitheater. That's at 1607 East Central. They've got concerts in the park sponsored by IHOP. June 16th, Lou Brown Band. June 23rd, Across the Pond. June 30th, Annie Up. July 7th, Lucky People. 3 outdoor concerts. You can bring your lawn chairs, blankets, extra cash for those food trucks. Can't bring a cooler in. Gates will open at 6:30. Again, that's Friday nights in Andover. Concerts in the park sponsored by IHOP begins this Friday with the Lou Brown Band. Tommy, the Royals fall last night, and we sit here and we look, and the chatter now becomes around Salvador Perez. Royals are one of the worst teams in baseball. It's interesting that all the chatter has been about Oakland, who's gotten on a little win streak here, and now, as Oakland is this historically bad team, and they are, the Royals are only like a game and a half better. And so it's been ugly. It has stayed ugly. It hasn't gotten better, and now the difficult conversations are already starting. We know Aroldis Chapman's going to get traded. We assume Scott Barlow's going to get traded. Salvador Perez is interesting. Salvador Perez, apparently, a team has called about him. The Royals have confirmed that. Basically, the old, we're not looking to trade him, but, we'll listen to offers conversation, which means they're looking to trade him, in my opinion. The teams are going to ask about him, of course. Salvador Perez, to me, is going to be a Hall of Famer. He's just 33. As crazy as that seems, he's just 33. He's hitting .273 this year. He's got 13 bombs. He can still catch. He's got a bunch of gold gloves. It's been a while since he's been that, but he can be a DH, first baseman, and a catcher for somebody. Salvador Perez is interesting. He is in the Mount Rushmore of Royals baseball players, to me, number 2, right there with George Brett. If he finishes his career in Kansas City, he's got a chance to be number 1. He means everything to this organization, but man, they're terrible. And I don't know if you get a legitimate trade offer in your Piccolo, how you don't entertain that. So Salvador Perez, so this is the conversation happening. Salvador Perez then to Ian Rodgers of MLB.com says, everybody knows that I love Kansas City and that I want to stay here for the rest of my career, but it's a business too. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know tomorrow I'm going to be here. I'm going to go play hard again. I will be as sad about Salvador Perez being traded, if he is, than any player for any team I've watched, covered, whatever, ever. And I loved Michael Young, and he was traded from the Rangers in a similar type situation. I will be devastated, and I'm not, a diehard Royals fan. Man, I love Salvador Perez, and he's the kind of player you want to see play in that one uniform forever. But if other teams are making crazy offers for him, like, what do? You gotta listen.
I'm going to go on the record right now and say that not only should the Royals entertain offers for Salvi, but I think the Royals ought to spearhead some talks to trade Salvi. And I hate that from an emotional point of view. I hate that because he is basically the only remaining player, like the only remaining part of those championship runs from Kansas City back in 2014 and 2015. And I think that this is less about Salvi and more of an indictment on the Royals front office for not surrounding him with the right people for success over the last 4 or 5 years. Because I think you're right. I think he's a Hall of Famer. I think that he is an incredible player. I mean, remember the season a couple of years ago, he put up like 50-plus home runs. Like, you know, he led the league in home runs or something like that. I mean, like, it was incredible. And those years, I hate to say it, they've been wasted. Those career years from Salvi, they've been wasted, right? Because the Royals have not been successful. They're 30 games under 500 right now. 30 games under 500. And so as much as I love Salvi, I think that it is the right thing to do to try to get as much value out of him right now as possible to try to stem the tide a little bit. Maybe not this season, but at least in the future, because, we've been talking about this rebuild, the young stars. Their farm system is gone. They've got nothing in the farm system. It's completely depleted. So get some value, get some young players to try to build that back up, because it's not a rebuild right now. They are at rock bottom right now. And so I hate to say it, I think it's the right thing to do to trade him.
Well, I mean, you got to get the appropriate return, and that diminishes the longer you wait because he is playing pretty well this year.
You're going to get more out of him at 33 than at 35 or 36.
Exactly. The tragedy of this season is that this is even a conversation, right? The tragedy of this season is that hope is seemingly in the short term lost. And because you're right, everybody was called up, and we warned last year, like, guys, like, calling up a AAA roster does not mean wins. And I know we're excited about these players, but I don't know what the short-term solution is. But you're right. In the long term, if you don't see any possibility of winning in the next 3 years, then what good is Salvador Perez doing you other than carrying the banner for your organization and being, an all-timer? And I think it becomes like, okay, let's say they trade him, and he goes and he has 3-4 good years with somebody else, maybe wins a title, and that fan base falls in love with him. He's always going to be a Royal, right? But there is a difference.
For sure.
There's a difference in Lorenzo Cain and George Brett, right? Adored and revered players, but George Brett did it all with Kansas City, and that matters. But, Lorenzo Cain was just honored by the organization this year and came back. So, does Salvador Perez, is he able to still come and be a part of the organization and everything It's all about? I think so too.
Absolutely.
It will impact his legacy.
Look at the response that Mike Moustakas got just recently when he came back and played at Kauffman for the first time with the Rockies. He got a standing ovation. I mean, and this is a guy that didn't spend nearly anywhere close to his entire career with Kansas City. He got a great ovation, so I think that you can still, I don't think it hurts his legacy. I think that it's one of those things where from an emotional point of view, yeah, you feel bad about it, but from a baseball point of view, and I would even say the most diehard Royals fans recognize the value you can get out of Salvi to hopefully try to turn this thing around long term. And I hate that, but it's the truth. The other component in this is that I'm sorry, I hate watching MJ Melendez play right field. Like, he is awful as a right fielder. He looks like a catcher trying to play right field. So you've got, and I know that Salvi, is the DH a lot of times, but you basically have opened up the catcher position full time for MJ Melendez at that point. If you move Salvi, you don't have to worry about Salvi getting any reps at catcher. It doesn't make me excited either, but at least that's another component to it right now.
Here's the example I'll give you of why this is a little bit scary. Adrian Beltre didn't get traded to the Rangers didn't sign with the Rangers till he was 32. Adrian Beltre is going to go into the Hall of Fame as a Ranger, right? He didn't even spend the most years there. I think he spent the most years or tied for in in L.A., and he was, he was in Seattle for a while too, and then spent a year in Boston. But like, that's the danger here if you're the Royals. What if, with the DH possibilities now, what if Salvador Perez goes and has 6 All-Star seasons and wins some titles with the Padres or whoever's trying to trade for him now? That's the danger if you're the Royals. Like, if you're, and there's no danger in that.
Is it a danger? It's not really a danger. I mean, it's like
it is to the, it's kind of like, we've talked about this in the NFL. Does New England, how much does New England love seeing Tom Brady win a championship in Tampa, right? Like, I don't know. It like the nostalgic component of it. Salvi, and there aren't a lot of players that do this, right? Like, Shohei Ohtani's going to maybe leave the Angels, and it's like, whatever. But if Mike Trout left the Angels, it's different story, right? And so that's what.
But even then, with Mike Trout, you've got this great talent.
I know,
and the franchise can't deliver a championship with him.
Salvi went to 2 championships with the Royals.
Right.
Let's not forget that either, and won one of them, and has been the only relevant thing about the organization for a few years now. I agree. If somebody makes a big offer, you got to take it. And that's, again, the tragedy of this season, because if they were remotely competitive at all, you don't have to do that. But they don't have anything in the pipeline, right? And they don't have the players that have graduated have not fared well. And so you've got this like hope, like, God, I hope Bobby Witt Jr. pans out. Right. And that's it. And look, so, yeah, I get it.
It's a simple value proposition. If you're a Royals fan, would you rather see Salvador Perez in 3 years hit 28 home runs and drive in 85 RBIs, and the Royals continue to be, losing 100 games a year with no farm system? Or would you rather get value out of Salvi right now at the age of 33
it's an easy
and
answer.
Get some impact players to be able to hopefully get this thing turned around?
It's an easy answer. I just don't want it to impact his legacy overall with the Royals.
It won't.
And the reality is it will.
He's beloved. He's beloved, and he will continue to be beloved. It doesn't matter if he goes somewhere else.
But it's different if you play your whole career somewhere and you don't. It is. And that's okay. Like, again, the tragedy of this season is this. And he has a no-trade clause. But I think when you read that quote, again, he gave to Ann Rodgers, it's a business. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know tomorrow I'll be here. So basically, I think he would probably be okay with it. And I hope he ends up somewhere good and he has a chance to win World Series. And yeah, if they get a big offer, it's about all they can do. And then it becomes a fire sale. And they have some tradable assets. They do. That they'll be able to retool. But I don't think they have a choice because they've hit rock bottom. This is rock bottom now. It's just how long does rock bottom last? If you thought the last 2 or 3 years were rock bottom, we were all wrong because this is rock bottom. I mean, they don't have much hope for the future outside of Bobby Witt Jr. And, there's not much coming up that you're really excited about. So this is it. Like you
like Vinny Pasquantino, but he's on the injured list now.
Yeah,
like
it's fine.
There are some other assets that I think are okay. Nick Prado, I think, is okay. Drew Waters is okay. Like, there are some other pieces.
Pasquantino and Witt are it for me. Like, that's all you're hanging your hat on right now. And so you got to go, trade everything out. You got to try and get some players in. You have to draft well and time free agency right because, again, the A's are historically bad, like one of the worst teams we've ever seen. And the Royals are only a game and a half better than that right now.
Yep. It's one of the great indictments, I think, in Major League Baseball. The fact that the Royals are this bad with absolutely no hope in their farm system at all. Like, what do you even hang your hat on outside of Bobby Witt Jr.? And I worry, and one of the things I'm concerned about is that there's been so much hope placed on the shoulders of Bobby Witt Jr. that he doesn't live up to it. And then that's another disappointment. I don't know. I have no idea. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's not like you've got a bunch of other pieces that you can point to help shoulder that expectation. It's Bobby Witt Jr. bust right now for the Royals because there's literally nothing else to hang your hat on.
33 years old. They got, there will be teams that want Salvador Perez. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But here's the other part of this now. as we continue the conversation. Would love to hear from you, Royals fans, on the IHOP hotline 869-1240. What if it's not an overwhelming offer, right? Like, what if it's just like a meh offer? Are you better served then at that point just to say no? Like, he's the only thing bringing people to the park. We're not going to take your crappy offer for Salvador Perez, and he's going to stay right here. We'll only trade him if it's a good offer. I think I'm okay with that. I don't like there is enough value in there are two players that people are going to show up to see, Salvador Perez and Bobby Witt Jr. And if you're not given a good offer, because I think there are teams that will sense desperation from Kansas City and be like, yeah, we'll give you this. We'll give you our 18th best prospect, and I don't know that's. I think it's got to be a good offer. I don't think you take just anything for Salvador Perez. You would take just anything for Chapman or Barlow or one of these, but you wouldn't do that for Perez. I wouldn't think. And this is a big spot for Piccolo because he's got to make his first real big decision in this role on what the value of Salvador Perez is, and if it's worth trading this franchise cornerstone, who again on Mount Rushmore is there with Brett and whoever else you want to put on it, but he's there, right? Most important player that's ever played for this organization outside of George Brett. So there's some pressure there too to make sure it's a good offer and not just any offer.
Right. I also wonder too at what point in this historically bad season for the Royals is basically everybody on the table outside of maybe Bobby Witt Jr. But at what point do you start entertaining? At what point do you start entertaining other options of, like, I guess at this point, let's blow the whole thing up. It's not working. We're 30 games under 500 in early June. At this point, it's not working. It's not going to work. Let's blow the whole thing up and start over.
That point is now. Who are the untradeable pieces for me? It's probably just those two, Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino. I think that might be it. I'm trying to like rack my brain to make sure I'm not missing a pitcher somewhere in there, but I don't think I am. I think I'd trade anybody. But another tragedy of this season is your guys have lost their trade value. Yep. Chapman's always going to have trade value because he throws at 102 miles an hour, and Barlow has been good enough to have value for a contender for sure. I don't know how much value a lot of these guys even have at this point, and so at some point, too, while we're on this, I asked this question yesterday. Like, does Quatraro get a second year?
I don't think you can blame Quatraro necessarily.
Oh, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Who are you going to blame? Because the same players weren't this bad last year.
Well, I think that
worse. They've gotten markedly worse, like all across the board.
I mean, I think it was pretty clear that he inherited a bad situation from day one,
and
right?
A bad situation has gotten worse.
Yeah, I think you can give him a second year because I do think, in my opinion, I'm not sure that you can place all of this on his shoulders. I think that the roster that he inherited from Dayton Moore, I mean, there's a reason why Dayton Moore is not with the team anymore. Right. I mean, at this point, would you have rather had Mike Matheny for another year? Because I don't think that's the right choice either.
Mike Matheny had this team much better last year than Quatraro does.
Much better? I mean, I think much better is a stretch. Like, I think
on
that
June, what are we? June 13th? Let's see if I can pull this up. Let's see. Well, let's compare June 13th of 2022. Surely the internet can find this for me. Where were we here? I don't know what their record was. I don't know that I can pull that up that
I mean,
quickly.
clearly their record was better this time last year than this year, but saying they're much better, I mean, come on. Like that,
I got it. They were 20 games under 500 last year instead of 30. Okay. That's pretty. That's 10% worse, or is that 20% worse? It's a lot worse. It's a whole lot worse.
Both are still really bad. I agree. I mean, come on.
But you made the change because it was so bad with Matheny, and now all the same players.
But don't you think that's more?
Worse.
Don't you think that's more of a this team was bad last year, and there's no indication that they're going to get better this year? Like, I think Quatraro needs a better roster, right?
But the narrative, Tommy, was that like this new coaching staff is going to come in and get so much more out of these young players. right? Now we're going to get that. Now we're going to see these pitch. We finally, we're making a change. Cal Eldred's not there. We're going to make all these changes, and now these players will get coached the right way, and they'll be much better. And they're not. They're worse. I don't think you give Quatraro a second year if this goes this badly for the entire season. I don't know how you justify it. And that's not a knock on him necessarily, because I don't, I've never talked to him, and I don't know. But it isn't like it got worse when it didn't feel like it could. Well, how do you justify that?
Look, if you're not going to give Quatraro a second year, I don't know how you can give J.J. Piccolo a second year at this point. I mean,
because he hasn't. You have to evaluate the trade deadline on that.
But keep in mind with Piccolo, it's not like he was brought in from somewhere else and inherited this roster. He was part of the Dayton Moore regime.
Got it.
Like, he was in it there also with Moore, and so I think that he needs to be held responsible also for this, right?
His evaluation will come at the trade deadline, and that will be, I think, how you evaluate him. But and again, I'm not sitting here saying any of this is directly Quatraro's fault, although I think some of it needs to be. I just, if you're trying to, if you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, you got to be willing to can the manager that has this team as bad as it ever has been.
If Quatraro had come in in his very first year and matched what Matheny did, and they were 20 games under 500, and they were still bad at 20 games under 500, you would be okay then with keeping him for another year at 20 games under 500.
Probably.
But somewhere between 20 and 30, that's your cutoff point?
It's not like a number of games. It's the fact that this team is definitively worse than it was a year ago. That's not debatable. It is worse. They have gotten worse, across the board. And if you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, then Quatraro should mean nothing to the organization. And what's the number one danger for Kansas City as an organization? It's that Bobby Witt Jr. doesn't pan out. And Bobby Witt Jr.'s been, he's coming along, right? But if there isn't, there should be no loyalty to Quatraro. Who cares?
Well, look, I'll take it a step further. If you're willing to trade Salvador Perez and you're willing to can Quatraro, at that point, outside of Bobby Witt Jr., everybody else should be able to go.
And Pascantino. And yes, everybody should be available to go. Absolutely. Because what are you hanging your hat on right now? And this all starts again with a Salvador Perez trade possibility. If you're willing to do that, you have to be willing to do anything to get this turned around, because that is the last thing you want to do.
You have to get out of the emotional headspace of the legacy of Salvador Perez and all of that. And I love Salvi. I love his personality and what he's brought to Kansas City. But you have to get out of that and think about the long-term viability of this franchise. And desperate times, unfortunately, call for desperate measures.
I get it. I agree. I think if you get a good offer for him, you got to make it. I just what's on the table here. Let's let Earl get a word in before we take a break on the IHOP hotline, 869-1240. Earl, how's it going, man?
Hey, I've had better days, but I can tell you this. As a Royals fan my whole life, I think old Q there is Urban Meyer's brother. To let that guy fester in Kansas City is abominable. It is so silly. They're not motivated. You watch him at press conferences. This man's been beat already. He is awful. He does not motivate this crew, and everything you're saying is absolutely correct. They are far worse than they were last year. There is no hope, and I'm a guy who believes in Santa Claus, that, by golly, what they brought in is abysmal, man. This guy, it just cut the ties, say, whoop, Urban Meyer's brothers, we made a mistake. Let's get him out of Dodge. Let's get some semblance of some hope back in Kansas City, because you know what? It was only 8 years ago, and I sat through 30 years between World Series. So even during those times, and, it can be hard to watch even during the worst of times. This is as bad and as yucky as I've ever seen Royals baseball, and the change they made at manager was wrong. get him out on a rail, put him on that rail, get him out of Dodge, man. He's awful.
Earl, we appreciate it. Thanks for the call. Yeah, I mean that's my point. Like, it got worse when it didn't seem like it could. And why would you not make a change now? The team is not responding. Like, if you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, what matters more to the organization? What matters more to the fan base? Salvador Perez or Matt Quatraro? Like, who cares?
I mean, I feel bad for Quatraro a little bit.
I do too. That's not the point. Like, I feel bad for him too.
It wasn't like there was all of this hope and optimism that they were going to be a contender with Quatraro now. It was like, no, they're bad. Maybe he can get them a little bit less bad, but the roster was stinky from day one.
Maybe he can get more out of these young players. That was the point, right? He comes in from Tampa and like they know what they're doing. But man, everybody's
the point was more about analytics. The point was more about, let's get a small market guy who knows analytics into Wichita.
Who cares, right?
I mean,
analytics,
Kansas City, yeah.
And analytics have you 10 games worse, so you can take that and throw it in the trash. Where's Ned Yost when you need him, right? Like, this team needs a little fire in their butt, and they don't have it. And so, like, there's just no point in letting this fester. Like, if you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, you're willing to do anything outside of trading Bobby Witt Jr. or Vinny Pasquantino, because that just doesn't make any sense. Like, you're willing to do anything else with the roster. And I think that they need to be. And that's where J.J. Piccolo now will get evaluated. And he'll probably get evaluated on, like, hey, man, I know you brought in Quatraro and everybody was really excited about this.
Right.
You were wrong, I think, because you're way worse. And now I'm not saying they need to make that change in the middle of the season. Let the season play out. But if in the offseason, if they keep at this pace and there's no sign of improvement, why would you even, like, what are you wasting your time for?
Well, and you mentioned wasting your time. Where the hell is John Sherman? Maybe rather than wasting your time on trying to sell a public on a new stadium,
I know.
Let's try to figure out this team that's 30 games under 500 and has zero hope on the field moving forward.
Good luck convincing the tax base that they need to put a stadium downtown right now. 869-1240 is the number to call. We'll come back. More Sports Daily. Appreciate the call there from Earl, 869-1240. We'll be right back. More Sports Daily after this.
When the whole family comes together to watch the game, nobody wants to miss a second of the action to run to the grocery store. With Instacart, you can get all your weekly groceries in as fast as an hour. Less time shopping means more game time. Let's go. Visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. $10 minimum per order. Additional terms apply. When life gets crazy busy, when doesn't it? Walmart helps you keep it all together, now with a little help from Instacart. If you need your groceries now-ish, but your options for going to Walmart are later-ish or never-ish, you can get everything you need delivered through Instacart right to your door in as fast as an hour. Skip the shop and savor more of your crazy busy life with Walmart and Instacart. Visit instacart.com to get free delivery on your first 3 orders. Offer valid for a limited time. Minimum order $10. Additional terms apply.
Looking for an adventure? Find yours in a Toyota truck. Like a Tacoma, the ultimate off-road machine. With available crawl control, you'll tackle anything in your way. Or an electrified Tundra with more power than ever before and a spacious high-tech cabin that puts you in charge. Or go with the legendary 4Runner, always reliable and durable over the toughest terrain. No matter your adventure, Toyota has you covered. Visit buyatoyota.com for more and let's go places.
Life. It's time to get back to the sports talk.
All right, let's do this thing. Go!
Sports Daily is on KFH.
All right, welcome back. Sports Daily, right here on KFH. It's all Brockton Caster. Let's continue this conversation because I think it's been an interesting one for folks, and we've got some some good commentary on the video streams. Jesse first says, a new stadium on the ballot in April. I think a Perez trade would make that impossible to sell. I think what's even harder than that, Jesse, is the fact that they're so bad. Like, you're not going to have a motivated. Imagine this vote coming in 2016, versus now. I think that's the problem in itself. And then Andrew has one that I do want to get into a little bit more. And Andrew says he doesn't think analytics, and we're talking about Cotrero now, has anything to do with this team being 10 games worse. Managing coaching doesn't really sway success that much. That seemed like a lazy generalization or dig out of frustration. So let me address that here. So if this team was 10 games better, we'd be sitting here saying, oh, see, it's Cotrero and his analytics. They're a 500 team like that. That's what it is. That's the difference. So you can't have it both ways, right? If analytics doesn't have that big an impact, analytics doesn't have that big an impact. It doesn't make you markedly better. It doesn't make you markedly worse. So you can't have that both ways. Now, I'm a little bit sensitive to that because I absolutely appreciate the value in analytics. I'm not anti-analytics, but I think it's way overblown. And I think managers like Ned Yost and Ron Washington will always have a place in this game because motivation is such a critical component of any coach, manager, whatever. And if you don't have this team behind you, what's the point? You can put a lot of people in there that understand analytics and can tell you which matchup you should put out there and which pitcher is more favorable based on a computer decides what analytics are. So it does matter. And it does have something to do with being 10 games worse. Now, am I blaming analytics? No, I'm saying this analytics guy that you've brought in is having zero impact on this team, and they're worse than they were before he came in.
But you also need to have the context of where the Royals were a year ago with a manager that historically has had a terrible relationship with his players, right? Like Mike Matheny, That's been in the news for a long time. When he was in St. Louis,
absolutely,
there were players that were rebelling against him because he was just a jerk to them. So I think that you have to have that in context in general, like with the way that the Royals
Matheny should have been gone far before he 100%. Was gone. Don't get me 100.
wrong. I hated that hire from day one. I thought it was an awful hire for Kansas City when you've got a big crop of young players with a manager who has been, on the record being anti-young players, hazing rookies and things like that. Like that's what Matheny has done his entire career, and they tried to sell it as a kinder, gentler, softer Mike Matheny. Bullcrap. So I think that if you don't know what's going on inside that locker room, inside that clubhouse right now with Cotrero, and you don't know how the players have responded to Cotrero and his leadership, right? So I think that if you are to blame, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but if you're to blame analytics as making this team 10 games worse, I'm not sure that that's a fair assessment.
I'm not blaming analytics at all. I don't care about it. My point is I don't care about the analytics right now. The analytics don't even matter. The fact is this team is worse than it was last year, and you made this, you made this change because you're saying that's not good enough. Listen, if there was anybody that thought the Royals would be this bad, speak up, because I didn't. Right? I thought they would be bad, but not like this. And so when this kind of bad happens, it has to be unacceptable. The players have to see that it's unacceptable. Everybody in the organization needs to know that it's unacceptable. Now, this season isn't over, and I'm not saying they need to fire Cotrero today. They don't. Unless there's, and I hope that disclaimer rang through for everybody, too, in the last segment. I've never talked to Cotrero. I don't know anything about that. Like, I had a feel for how that team responded to Ned Yost, right, because I was there. I was in the middle of it. I'm not that right now, so I can't speak to that. But it cannot be acceptable. If you are willing to trade the second most important player that has ever put on a Royals hat in Salvador Perez, you have got to be willing to do anything. And if Salvador Perez can be a casualty of this, then who cares about Cotrero?
Right. But I think that it's okay. Like, I understand Cotrero being a casualty in all of this. I get it. He didn't build it. He didn't make it this way.
Yep.
He's not to blame for the reason that this roster is the way that it is. But if he's got to be a casualty of it, I get it. I understand it. The front office and the ownership they've got to fall on the sword for this, because this master rebuild plan that we've been hearing about for I don't know how many years hasn't worked. And there's no indication it's going to work. So I think that long term, like those guys, and Dayton Moore already has fallen on his sword, but JJ Piccolo, I think he's probably got to be next. If you're talking about trading Salvador Perez, and if you're talking about Matt Quatrero being a casualty, there is no reason why JJ Piccolo shouldn't be a casualty either.
Because his job now will be determined by this trade deadline, right? Like that's what his job's going to be determined on. He's, I think different roles have different responsibilities. And if we all definitively sit here and are like, dang, they got a lot out of that trade deadline. They did a lot. Then I think that's different than the on-field manager winning games. Because
but right now, knowing where J.J. Piccolo has been throughout the last several years, and now is the general manager, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much faith do you have in him?
Like 2. But I got to see this trade deadline first and see what he's able to work, right?
So let's say that he has a good trade deadline, and your faith goes from a 2 to a 4. Is that still acceptable for him to be the general manager of this team? Is he the guy that you feel comfortable in trying to rebuild this team again and lead them back to contention again? Because he was part of the regime that did it last time, and it didn't work. It was a
curious hire to begin with, and I just can't answer that now. Here's an example I'll give you, though. So, and again, I don't mean to do this because it's the Rangers, but it's recent, and it's very similar. So John Daniels was the GM there of their glory years, right? And he was basically demoted or let go. I don't even remember now. It's very similar to Dayton Moore's situation, right? And they promoted from within. Chris Young, by the way, former Royals pitcher, and he's done a fantastic job now at one trade deadline and in one free agency. So, and that was despite them not being very good last year. So I think you're talking about two different things here. And they went out and they brought in Bruce Bochy after their young analytics guru didn't work out. Now, they gave him 3 years, I think, but it wasn't getting any better. They brought in Bruce Bochy, and boom, all of a sudden it's like, oh, here's this old-timer. And Bruce Bochy's very analytically savvy. He's not Ned Yost, but he's also old-school baseball. And here's the other thing I'll say about analytics, and I don't know the answer to this because I think we haven't had enough time. Rule changes are going to change what's valued, right? Like, stolen bases are going to be valued now more than they were before. And, average is going to be valued now more than it was before. Like, the analytics are going to have to adapt back to these rule changes. And I'm not smart enough to know how that will happen or to what degree things matter as much or less than they used to. I don't know that yet. So that's a part of it too. But the point on Quatrero is, I'm not saying this is Quatrero's fault. I'm saying what was bad got worse. And they are getting less out of really critical players to this organization. And that is the great danger. The great danger is that you get into a position that you even have to think about trading Salvador Perez. So what is Matt Quatrero? Matt Quatrero means nothing right now. If they're not responding and they're worse than they were in a bad year, like that's a simple casualty, right? Like, hey man, not putting the blame on you here, but that got out of hand real quick. We got to make a change. Like, this didn't work. Sorry about it. Hope you succeed somewhere else. And you have to try something else. The general manager spot, we'll see. Piccolo has got his chance right now. He didn't have a good offseason. I'll say that. So that's not working in his favor. He didn't do anything in the offseason to make the team better. So, can you get a lot out of Aroldis Chapman? That'll make that a better offseason move if he brings a big return at the deadline. If they go and add a bunch of, top prospects and you can go to evaluators and say, and they all say, yeah, the Royals went from one of the worst farm systems to pretty good in one season. I think that's how you evaluate Piccolo. Yeah. And if he's willing to make the tough decision to trade Salvador Perez, is he willing to make the decision to say, this is unacceptable, we got to make a change in the clubhouse? I think those things help evaluate him. Quatrero, it's all on the field. It's all wins and losses.
I mean, let's talk about the moves that J.J. Piccolo made in the offseason. Franmil Reyes
hired Quatrero, by the way.
Franmil Reyes, no longer with the organization. Jackie Bradley Jr. just got designated for assignment. Jordan Lyles hasn't won a start for the Kansas City Royals. I mean, outside of Aroldis Chapman, I mean, there wasn't any other kind of acquisition that JJ Picollo made. So I'm not willing at this point. I know you keep saying he's going to be evaluated by the trade deadline. I'm already evaluating him. I've evaluated him from day one. And I'm not sure that even the most successful trade deadline would make me gain a ton of confidence in this guy's ability to be the one to turn this around for the Royals.
I don't disagree. He hired a manager that's not working, right? And he'd had an abysmal offseason that's totally unacceptable. And the pitchers are getting worse. You got everyone thought Cal Eldridge leads and all these pitchers are going to be better. Yep. They're not. So I'm with you on that. I think that's totally on the table. I don't have a problem. I don't think the urgency of it is as high on June 13th as it will be on August 13th, but I'm with you. I think you can absolutely make that change, and there's some responsibility as we talk about trickling up to John Sherman to say, again, across the organization,
100%.
Because John Sherman, by the way, inherited what we currently see too. Like he took over when these were all the players that were going to be the next big thing. So it's not like, that's all.
But
his
think about when
responsibility.
Sherman took over, and he comes from the Indians, or now the Guardians organization, and they were willing to spend money, and they were bringing in free agents and all of that. And there was this initial hope that, hey, John Sherman's going to come in, and we're going to actually get to see some decent players coming into this organization. Hasn't happened, and nope. The guy has been, in my opinion, MIA from what's actually going on this season to go and try to sell this brand new stadium. It's like, Can we focus in on what's happening on the field? They're 30 games under 500 on June 13th.
It's all very unfortunate timing for Sherman, but yes, he does need to more vocally and publicly be disgusted by this, because that's what the fans want right now, right? It's not that simple. We're not naive. I get it. It's not. There's nothing simple about this. But public perception matters, especially when you're trying to sell a new stadium. Public perception matters, and you've got to be like, what do you think Jerry Jones would be doing right now?
Yeah, exactly.
Not that he's like this shining model of ownership, but generally, think about what do you think George Steinbrenner would have been doing right now? What do you think the new Mets owner would be doing? No, you got to get out there and say, wow, this is bad. But the problem is he hasn't been willing to go pony up for any good players. And so that's where he doesn't really have a leg to stand on there. Like, you can't – what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You are not going to have people excited about a new stadium if you're this bad. There's no debate about that. So
the only reason – last night at Kauffman was Chiefs night. The only reason people showed up was to see Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Andy Reid.
By the way,
that's the only reason why.
Patrick Mahomes is a part owner of the Royals here.
Yep.
Maybe we ought to hold Patrick Mahomes accountable for this failure. I'm kidding, Chiefs fans. Don't bring your pitchforks at me. That was a joke. But yeah, this has to get better. And to put a bow and circle it all back, if Salvador Perez is on the table, everybody's on the table. Outside of Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino, because again, that doesn't make any sense. But organizationally, if Salvador Perez is on the table, there is no more important member of the Royals organization, period, than Salvador Perez. So if he's on the table, everyone's on the table. 869-1240, the IHOP hotline. It's all Brockton Caster. We've almost spent an hour on the Royals. Didn't see that coming. Thanks, everybody, for the Royals chatter on our video streams and on the IHOP hotline at 869-1240. The Nuggets are NBA champions. Christian Braun is an NBA champion. 7 points, played 24 minutes for the Nuggets last night. Critical minutes, key component to the championship, key component to that series. We'll see what he's able to do. Doesn't get much better than a natty in college, followed by a natty in the NBA. In your first year, and sort of becoming this character that people are paying attention to now in the NBA. And Tommy, as we come back to that, I wonder how good Braun, what is Braun's NBA ceiling? I wonder about that, because his energy is contagious. I think he can be a defender at that level. I don't think he'll ever be like a high octane, high level scorer in the NBA. But I do think he's a guy that can get that, second contract and become a key cog for somebody. And I think you do need to, cook in some room for improvement, because that's all he's ever done, right? He always gets better. But I think he's got a chance to have a long NBA career and get that second contract and get a big payday.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the college championship and the NBA championship, also 3 state titles in high school. So the guy's a champion, by every term of the definition there. I think that it was kind of interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Nuggets fan, and I said, hey, when you look at Christian Braun long term, like after this season, is he a guy that you could see starting on this team? Or do you feel like he's got that the energy factor to be the spark plug off the bench, and that's where he's best suited? And, my friend was like, I think he could be a starter on this team. And I don't know if that's going to be the path for him, or if Michael Malone sees him more valuable as a guy coming off the bench and giving them a spark of energy. But regardless of that, I think he's got a role, moving forward. There were a couple of games early in the playoffs he didn't play at all. You really saw the Nuggets lean on him more as the NBA Finals went on in the biggest spot, and he delivered.
Yep, I agree. And I think that, again, I think he can get better. And, they took him probably earlier than people thought, so they obviously liked him. And I'm not trying to say, as we talk about Fred VanVleet maybe getting a max contract now, but Brown could have a similar path where he sort of grows into this role. And I think if you're Denver and you're thinking about the longevity of this, and I don't know if they'll have cap casualties or anything like that, I think he becomes a cog that you can count on, at least right now, if nothing else, because he's affordable. It reminds me sort of, it reminds me of, as we try and compare it to local players, Landry Shamet, right? Like the early impact he had, and then he became an insanely desirable player for a lot of different teams now. So interesting to watch Brown, the Kansas native. Yeah, state championships, good point. To college championship, to NBA championship. What's next? An MVP in year 2? I mean, I don't know. For Christian Braun, I don't know how you keep it up. But he certainly has. Congratulations to him, and always cool for the state of Kansas.
Nationals baseball is in full swing.
Strike 3 called. He got him looking. That's 10 strikeouts for Mackenzie Gore.
With the free Odyssey app, local fans can listen live all summer long, whether you're at the grill or at the pool.
Going, and gone. Goodbye. C.J. Abrams, a grand slam.
Nationals baseball. Nationals announcers streaming live on the free Odyssey app. AUDACY. Get in the game and download it today.